Okay, so we're going through the pancake stretch. I want you, if you're new to this, to get something to sit on. If the hips are a little bit higher up, it'll allow you to get into the stretch. It pushes your center of gravity a little bit further forward if your hips are higher than your feet. So get something to sit on to begin with. If you're already on the ground, then go on the ground, that's fine. I'm going to sit on something slightly raised up because I'm not into the full pancake yet. So first thing I want you to do is go into the straddle position. So bring the feet nice and wide. Then you're going to sit yourself back down onto your cushions or your books, whatever it is you've got for your support. Now your pelvic bones, those bony bits in your bum, I want you to get it to the very front of whatever it is you're sitting on, and you want to act as if they're almost going to catch on whatever it is. So as you lean forwards, it's going to rotate your pelvis forwards as well, which will help open up the hip joint. Another thing we're going to do to help with that is point the toes, and then we're going to turn the legs outwards. We're going to externally rotate the femur, again opening up that hip joint. So keeping the quads locked to make sure that the knees don't bend. All we're going to do, breaking through the hips, is start pressing through, leaning into it. For the first minute of this, I call it feathering out, just feeling what the stretch is like. I want you to go over to one side, a little bit down the middle, and just play around with the position, find where it feels tight, and then work through any tight positions you have. Once you've done that for a minute, I then want you to go over to one side. So I'm going to go over to my left, I'm going to grab onto either my knee, my shin, my ankle, whatever you can hold onto with your left hand. With the other hand, you're going to reach over the top and try, if you can, to get yourself all the way down to touching that toe. If you're unable to do that, as long as you've got a good stretch in this side of the back, then don't worry about it. 1 minute on the left, 1 minute onto the right, same thing. With the right hand, reach through, reach over the top with the other hand, a minute there, and then we're going to come back to the starting position, reset yourself on your support if you need. Again, try and get yourself to the very edge so it's like you're falling off the edge as you lean into it. And then for those final 2 minutes, back to the center and really start pulling yourself into this stretch. Now, if you're finding it difficult to increase the stretch just with your own body weight, grab something around the house, grab onto a table. I've got like a kettlebell here, you can just stick that out in front of you, and it'll give you an anchor point to then create a little bit more tension to help pull you further and further into the stretch. Now, the goal in this, the long-term goal, is to be able to get your whole body flat down onto the ground. It takes a lot of time and patience, but it ultimately is really going to be worth it, so stick with it. And that's the pancake stretch. Yep, okay, so the next exercise we're going to do today is the pigeon stretch. Now, this is included in a few different workouts. There's different levels to it. It's primarily for stretching the medial glute, the upper outer part of the glute, and that's where you should feel the stretch. There might be incidences when you get in the hamstring, but we're going to go through how to correct that. So if you're brand new to it, it's easier if your front leg and front knee are a little bit higher. Now, this might be somewhere awkward in between for people just starting off, but I'll use it as an example. So to get into the pigeon stretch, you want to have a 90-degree bend in the front knee. So maintaining 90-degree bend is pretty important. So get your front leg up, 90-degree bend. Try and keep the hip and the knee in line if possible. Now, 2 movements. You're still going to be keeping your body upright to begin with. But the way we're going to really try and increase this stretch is by twisting the opposite hip down into the ground as if you're trying to get it underneath the opposite knee. So in this position for me, my left hip, I'm going to be twisting it down and towards underneath my right knee. Even just doing that immediately starts getting a little bit of a stretch in the upper outer glute. So if you got that, great. If you wanted to increase the stretch and you're more mobile than this, you can get lower down. I want you to try and keep some tension through the body, so don't lose the position all through the back, and start pivoting through the hip down at first towards the knee. Now, as you're doing this, you should feel the stretch, like I say, in this upper outer glute. If you don't, if you start feeling the stretch more so in the hamstring, what I want you to try and do is bring the knee up above the ankle. So we can just use some pillows for this. Exactly the same position. But now my knee is going to be higher than the ankle, so I'm going to set up exactly the same, 90-degree bend. Start pushing that hip down into the ground, twisting the body in, leaning in, and you should find with the difference in height between the knee and the ankle, the stretch will come off the hamstring and be more so on the upper outer glute. So next we're going to go through shoulder taps. It's a core exercise, again core stability but with a little bit of dynamic movement. So it's like doing a plank in the fully extended position through the elbow, but instead of just staying still like we're doing the plank, we're going to start reaching across, touching the opposite shoulder while stabilizing the hips. So set up as if we would for a press up, only we're going to bring the hands slightly narrower than normal and the feet slightly wider to help with the stability. Squeeze the quads to lock the knees, squeeze the glutes, suck in and brace the core, bring the shoulder blades back in together. Then you're going to reach across, minimally moving the hips and touch the opposite shoulder. So my right hand's going to come up, touch my left shoulder, return to the ground. Now if as I do that, my whole weight is shifting, my body's moving, then I'm not into the position properly. I need to brace harder, I need to engage the core harder, so that as I reach across, there's minimal movement through those hips. And you'll do this for anywhere between 30 and 60 seconds. And that's shoulder taps. So we're going to go through the banded dead bug core exercise. You're going to need a band for this. I choose quite a light band because you don't need a huge amount of resistance. So to set up, we're going to get onto our back. We're going to grab a band in each hand. And then before we exercise, we're going to pull that band down below the chest to keep tension through the core. But before we do that, I'm going to show you the setup of the hips down. We're trying to get a 90-degree bend in the hip, in the knee, and in the ankle as well. So we want those legs to be parallel with the ground, 90-degree bends everywhere. Then, once you've taken your band in each hand, you're going to bring your hands down below the chest to keep tension through the core. Now, before we move, you're going to take a strong exhale. This is super important. We're trying to activate something called the transverse abdominis. And this is encouraged and increased by taking a strong exhale before we move. So, exhale, one foot goes down, doesn't touch the ground, comes back up. Second foot goes down, doesn't touch the ground, comes back up. Then you inhale. So you've been holding your breath that whole time. Whilst you're doing this and you're bracing that core hard, you're trying to keep your lower back driven into the ground. This gets more difficult as you bring the foot closer to the ground, but you've really got to work hard to drive it in. And that's the banded dead bug. Yep. Next exercise is the crab walk. We have two different bits of kit. If you have one of these bands, excellent, use that. Just wrap it around either the ankle or above the knee. But if you don't, and you have one of these bands, which I've been recommending a lot of people to buy, so I'm going to demonstrate with this. This is how you set it up. So just hold the band hanging in half, bring it down, and then make a regular looped knot. Nice and simple. Pull it taut. Then ignore this part, and you're going to go to the big loop, and then you're going to fold that in half on itself. Once you've got it in half like that, that's now your equivalent of the blue band. So, two different positions. I want people who are less progressed with this exercise to bring this above the knee. So, the higher the band is, the closer it is to the pivot point, whatever force it is, the less force will be required. The further away you get from the pivot point, which is here is the hip, the more difficult this is. So, the setup for the crab walk, we're going to start with it above the knee. I want you to set up like a squat. Start ripping the floor in half, drive those knees out, pivot at the hip and kick them backwards slightly so you're in somewhat of a squat position. Shoulder blades back and together, maintain tension through the core. You're then going to step out with one foot, drive it out with the knee. Big step, drive the knee out. Hold that position, don't let those knees collapse in, keep driving them out. Bring the other foot in. Again, notice I didn't drag the foot in and I didn't let it get pinged in by the band. You're keeping tension on the glutes. So into the position, out and in, out and in. That's the crab walk. Okay, so we're going to go through the monster walk. You're going to need a light band for this. If you don't have one of the little blue bands that goes around the knees, one of the smaller ones, then just grab one of your longer ones. All you need to do is tie a simple knot partway through it, and then you can ignore anything that's above the knot, and it gives us a smaller band to use for what we're about to do. To increase the resistance, I find it best to cross this over. If you double it up, it means you're going to get a little bit more resistance through the band. So this is what we're going to use. So this is the monster walk. We're going to step through the band, and as with the crab walk, the further away from the pivot point, the further away from the hip this is, the more work is going to be required. So I'm just going to start just above the knee. This is what I would suggest for people that are new to this exercise. So setting up very similar to the crab walk, we're going to rip the floor apart, engage the quads, hamstrings and glutes. Then we're going to pivot the hips slightly, kick those hips back just slightly. Now, as opposed to in the crab walk where we're going side to side trying to hit just the medial glute, what we're going to do here is we're going to walk forwards and then we're going to walk backwards. But the key is to keep the feet the same distance apart. As you step forwards, the band is going to get stretched and try and pull your feet together. This is where you're doing most of your work. So work hard to keep your feet on tram tracks. Forwards and then backwards. So when you do both movements, you'll feel it in those medial glutes a lot. And that's the monster walk. And so the next exercise we're going to go through is a single leg glute bridge, good warm up for hamstrings and glutes, and two variations of it. I'll show you the basic setup first. So onto your back, you're going to want something that's higher than you are, so something to bring the feet up onto. I'm just going to use my bed. I'm going to get myself in, so I've got roughly a 90-degree bend into my knee.
So I'm going to choose my left leg to work first. The two different variations of this we're going to do. First variation, we're going to be driving the heel into the top of the support. This is going to be more of a hamstring activator than a glute activator. So for the glute bridge position, heel driven in, brace the core. You're going to drive the hips up towards the ceiling, and as you do so, you're going to bring the opposite knee through into flexion. So I'm going to drive that heel in, drive the hips up towards the ceiling as I bring my knee back, and then down under control, keeping that tension on the hamstring. So the second variation of this, setup's exactly the same, principle's the same, only I'm going to have the arch of my foot driven into the edge of the support. This is going to give me the opportunity to switch on that glute a lot more. So same again, driving that foot in, I'm going to drive the hips up towards the ceiling, bring the opposite foot through, squeeze hard at the top, down under control. And that's the two variations of the single leg glute bridge.
Yep, so we're going to go through the band pull apart. So grab your red band or one of the lighter bands that you've been able to get your hands on. We're going to start off by going to the very edge of the band if you're new to this exercise. So what we'll do is, to set up, we want to have our shoulder blades pulled back and together, squeezing our glutes and squeezing our core. When people are going through this exercise, pulling the band apart, they'll very often lose tension in their glutes and core. And when they do so, they lose the position of the back and to go into hyperextension. So remember, squeeze the glutes, suck the core in, engage it. Shoulder blades get pulled back and together, and then from that position, we're just going to bring our hands apart as far as we can, squeezing the shoulder blades together hard, forwards under control. We want to get roughly a 1 second pause between each rep. So squeeze and forwards. That's horizontal. We're then going to change into diagonal. So one hand up, one hand down, all the principles the same. Glutes, core, upper back all engaged. Pull apart, keep tension on the band, swap over. Keep tension on the band, swap over. And that's the band pull apart. Okay, next we're going to go through the straight arm pull down. So to set this up, ideally I would have a higher anchor point than this, but where I am I don't have, so adapt and overcome. I'm just going to go at the height that I have available and drop onto my knees instead. Or what you can do is you can just kick the hips backwards, keeping the shoulder blades back and together, and create the angle some more for yourself. So I'll go onto the knees first and then I'll change it over. So I'm going to take a band in each hand. The setup, keeping the glutes engaged, core engaged, shoulder blades back and together. Take a big breath in, brace the core, shoulder blades back. With straight arms, with your elbows locked, you're going to pull your hands in towards your hips. Hold for a second, forward under control. Shoulder blades back and together, glutes and core engaged, hands to the hips, forwards under control. If I'm doing this standing, exactly the same, only now I'm going to kick those hips backwards into a hip hinge position. I'm keeping my core braced, my glutes engaged, my shoulder blades back and together so I don't lose the position through my back. I'm trying to keep a nice neutral spine. Exactly the same movement though. Big brace, shoulder blades back and together, hands into the hips, power, hold, forwards under control. And that's a straight arm pull down. Okay, so we're just going to go through some hip hinge technique work, ready for doing variations of the deadlift. So I'm going to use a little bar for this just to highlight the position of the back and the head. But first of all, from the ground up, we're going to have our feet hip distance apart. Just like with the squat, we're ripping the floor in half, we're engaging the upper legs, the glutes, cores braced and shoulder blades back and together. From the back, I'm going to have this pole up against my back so I know I'm keeping a neutral spine position as I go through this movement. So ripping that floor apart, shoulder blades back and together. I'm going to initiate this by kicking the hips backwards, so the hips go back. If you notice, because this pole's in contact with me, my whole back staying straight, my head staying in line. Kicking those hips back as far as I can, so I start feeling a good stretch in the hamstring. As I start feeling that stretch, and I start bending through the knee. I'm trying to get my body as close to parallel with the ground as possible without losing the position through the back anywhere. So shoulder blades back and together, keep the core braced, driving those knees out, squeezing the glutes, find your bottom position, pause for a second, and then come back up by driving through the ground, driving the hips forwards and the knees and hips all lock at the same time. So that's a little bit of technique for the deadlift. Okay, so next we're going to go through the double banded glute bridge. For this, you need some sort of resistance bands. I've only got reds or greens, so I'm doubling up the reds just to give it a good amount of resistance. You're also going to need, or ideal, have a smaller band to go around the knees. So the way we're going to set up for this, I'm going to put my small blue band up around my knees, just above the knee joint. And then I'm going to get my bands and I'm just going to hold them in half. I'm going to put my foot through one set of loops and then my other foot through the other set. get it into the arch of the foot because you don't want those bands coming away. And I'm going to take a seat on the support that I'm going to use. Now you don't want your support to be too high. At the top of your position in the glute bridge, you're looking for your shoulder, your hip and your knee all to be roughly in line. So this might be a little high for me, but you've just got to use what's available. So use your couch, use your bed, whatever you've got. So with the band wrapped around the crook of the foot, we're then going to pull these bands up into the crease of the hip. And they should sit there quite comfortably. It might take a little bit of use to doing that. Once you've got them comfortably in the crease of the hip, walk the feet away and get your shoulder blades onto your support. Now the position you're looking for with your feet, you don't want a massive gap between them. So maybe just a foot's distance, a foot's width between. Get your shoulder blades comfortably positioned. We want to create external rotation so the medial glutes are getting a lot of work. So we're going to drive the knees out, pushing them out away and keep them away. From here, shoulder blades back and together. We're going to brace the core, drop the hips down low, keeping the spine neutral, and then from the bottom position, drive the hips up towards the ceiling, feet into the ground, push the knees apart and squeeze the glutes hard at the top. Now notice I'm not bringing my hips up way above the knee, and I'm not trying to get pelvic tilt as we do this. We're trying to keep our spine neutral. So down under control, big breath in, brace, drive up, squeeze hard, down under control. Now if you find that the bands you have available to you aren't giving you enough resistance, increase the reps because you'll get a lot of work through the glutes and hamstrings doing this. But if you have anything like kettlebells, dumbbells, or even just grabbing a backpack, throw that on your hips at the same time, increase the resistance. And that's a double banded glute bridge. Okay, so we're going through a little bit of technique for the reverse lunge. I haven't prescribed forward lunges to anyone except for the ATG split squat because I find it puts too much pressure through people's knees. So instead of doing forward lunges, we're going to do reverse lunges. And the way you're going to set up for this, now, unlike pretty much every other lower body exercise we do where we initiate by breaking at the hips and kicking them backwards first, for this we're actually going to break at the knee first. So in this instance I'm going to use my left leg. So I'm going to brace the core, keep my head up, shoulder blades back. I'm going to break at the left knee and then my right foot is going to reach back for the ground. I'm not looking to take a huge step back and I don't want to lose the position of my body, so I've got to keep my core nice and tight. So I'm going to break at the knee, reach back with the foot, and then start kicking the hips backwards. That's when we pivot at the hips. So we're going to pivot the hips backwards. As we do that, the body's going to lean forward slightly. We'll reach back and find the ground with the foot, and then we're going to drop down till the knee touches the ground. As you can see, I am leaning forwards into this. I'm looking to keep my center of gravity roughly over midway up my thigh. The knee doesn't want to be driven too far over the toe. If it is a little bit over the toe, as long as your heel's still in contact with the ground, that's showing that you've got enough ankle mobility to be in that position. But if your heel's coming up, then you're too far forwards with the knee and you need to bring your body weight backwards slightly. From the bottom position, all you're going to do is transfer your weight forwards onto the front foot, drive the front foot into the ground, lock the knee and hip at the same time as you stand up. So all the way to the front, drive up, lock hard at the top. So it's going to be break at the knee, hip goes back, reach back with the foot, find the ground, drop the knee. You're leaning forwards, keeping that weight over the thigh, lower the front leg up, lock the hip and knee at the top. And that's the reverse lunge. So this is the Romanian deadlift variation. The technique is very similar, only you're not going to allow anywhere near as much of a bend through the knee. So you set up exactly the same, splitting that floor in half, quads, hamstrings and glutes. Core is engaged, shoulder blades are pulled back and together, pushed into the back pockets. I'm going to use this technique bar to show my position through my back again. So everything's in contact, heads up in line. So you're going to initiate just like you would on a regular deadlift. You're going to kick those hips backwards. Only now when you start feeling any sort of stretch in the hamstring, you're not going to allow yourself to bend through the knee to compensate. You're going to have to bend slightly through the knee, but no more, and you'll get more lengthening of that hamstring. So you might find that you're not able to get as low down. If you are holding onto a weight in front of you, it might not be able to touch the ground in a Romanian deadlift, whereas it would be if you're doing a full deadlift with a bend through the knee. But don't worry about that. As long as you're getting that lengthening through the hamstring, then you're doing the right thing. So from the bottom position of the Romanian deadlift, from down here, everything's still in line, shoulder blades are still pulled back and together, the legs are nice and straight. All I want you to do is keep those shoulder blades pinched, drive the feet into the ground. I want a lot of intent with the hips as you come up. So as you start to straighten up, drive those hips forwards, squeeze the glutes rock solid. And that's the Romanian deadlift variation.